I had an abortion on March 29th, 1985, and it was, I can honestly say, it was the most excruciating, humiliating, regrettable mistake of my entire life. I spent the next 7 years trying to forget that choice I made. When I was making that choice, trying to decide what to do, I kept justifying the decision because I thought the Supreme Court is much smarter than me. I'm only 19 years old. And so they must have made it legal for a reason, made abortion legal. But I knew something inside me didn't feel right. It was like my gut was telling me that this wasn't a really good decision. But everything I was hearing from the media and what I had heard, of course, from the Supreme Court made me feel like, well, maybe there's more to it. And that's why they made it legal. So it must be okay. And so I had that abortion, and literally for the next 7 years, I tried to forget it. I became reliant upon drugs and alcohol just to get through the day. I looked forward to keeping my mind numb as much as possible, because the minute the high would wear off or I would get sober, I would remember what that clinic was like, who I saw, the card with my number on it, because they didn't go by names, they just went by numbers. And I would think about that room that was filled to capacity with girls that looked just like me, and how horrible that place was. It stunk. My recovery room was a beanbag chair. It was horrible. And I got up from that place and left there and really thought I was making the right decision. I could go on with my life, and nothing could have been further from the truth. During that time, I kept trying to fix a problem that was unfixable in my own strength. I was looking for a natural answer that needed a supernatural intervention. And as I went through this time, the 7 years of just searching, how do I deal with this? I finally came upon what I thought was the answer, and it was to end my life. I thought if I could end my life, then that's the fix. That is what will fix this, because the drugs and alcohol aren't working, and living with the pain and the shame and the regret that I was living with, I couldn't do it. I started thinking about my 30-year-old self and my 40-year-old self, and how could I carry this baggage with me through my whole life? And so I planned the day, I planned the method. It was a horrible day. I drove home from work in the middle of the day, and I took my roommate's gun and I put the pistol right between my eyes, and I sat there on the side of my couch. And there's never been a time in my life I have felt more hopeless than I was right then. And I sat there like that with that gun between my eyes. And I was afraid to pull the trigger, so I was just saying out loud, just do it, just do it. And so finally I thought, okay, if I pull the trigger real slowly, then I won't know when the bullet releases. And so I held my breath and I started pulling the trigger really slowly. And it was in that second that I heard tires on the gravel outside my apartment. And I jumped up, because no one was supposed to be at my apartment that day, but I jumped up and looked out the window, and it was my roommate home 4 or 5 hours early from work. And when I saw her, it hit me that she would have walked in and saw me like that. It would have messed her up for the rest of her life probably. And I had never once thought about who I was going to be affecting by doing that. So instantly I knew I didn't want to do that to her. So I ran and I put her pistol back in her nightstand drawer. And I laid there the rest of the day in my bed just thinking, I have no plan past this day. Everything was pointed toward this day because I knew it was going to end it all. And so I went through the rest of this 7-year period just trying to live, trying to survive. I cleaned myself up enough to get married. I've tricked my husband pretty much into believing I was okay. We had a child right away. And it wasn't until a year and a half into our marriage that I told him that I had had an abortion. And I thought, he'll leave me, he'll reject me, but he didn't. He loved me. Together we found a Bible study. I heard about it on the radio, a Bible study. We weren't in church. We weren't even, the only time I thought about God was when I thought he's gonna punish me, or can he please forgive me? I was begging for his forgiveness. And I heard about this Bible study, and I went to it, and it was like I got my life back on a silver platter. It took me this 7-year period to go from the lowest of the low that I could have been to realizing God sent his son. Jesus' death on the cross was enough to cover my sin of abortion. And I spent those 7 years thinking nothing could cover that sin. But I finally realized that he took care of it on the cross, and I really could be forgiven, and not just put a Band-Aid over a wound, but it was like he came in and healed the wound. And I still have the scar. I'll always have the regret because I don't have my 35-year-old daughter who should be with me right now. But I can live now. I can walk into that abundant life that he came to give me. And I realized through this Bible study that he wanted me to do more. It was like I just felt like I loved this feeling of freedom so much. I wanted other men and women to know they could have that freedom too. Because for 7 years I thought I was the only one that suffered after an abortion. But I realized there are millions of us who suffer after an abortion. And so I started volunteering at the pregnancy center that helped me, because I immediately wanted to give back to them, because I was so thankful for them reaching me where I was and accepting me like I was and loving me. So I started volunteering there, and I kept hearing people say in our classes, I immediately signed up and started teaching their abortion recovery. And in our classes, I kept hearing someone say, if I could just save one unborn baby, I would be willing to tell my story. And I knew in the confines of this small group, like that's a lot. You know, it takes a lot of courage to come to that small group and admit that you've had an abortion and talk about it openly. But then to say, if I could just save one unborn baby, I would be willing to risk rejection, humiliation, risk my reputation. But these women were willing to do that. And so I started churning that around. And then in the middle of all of this, my family, through my husband's job, got transferred to Nashville, Tennessee. And so when we moved to Nashville, we got involved in a big church up here, and I started teaching abortion recovery. The very first night I taught this Bible study, I heard someone say, if I could just save one unborn baby, I'd be willing to tell my story. And I realized then, like, God wants me to do something about this. I started praying. I started telling these 10 women who showed up at this very first class what God was showing me. And he started showing me that these women, and now men and family members as well, needed a platform to tell their stories, to be truth tellers. And so I wrote my own Bible study. He led me to write my own Bible study, the SaveOne Women's Guide. Then we started having men. I wrote the men's study. My husband has now reworked that study from a man's standpoint. Then we started having family members. So I wrote The Ripple Effect for grandparents and siblings. And when I first started this organization, SaveOne, I literally thought it was just going to be a little Bible study I taught at my church. But as of this taping, this organization, SaveOne, is on 5 continents. We're in 25 nations around the world. That first book that the Lord led me to write, it's now been translated into 20 different languages, and it's being used to raise an army of truth tellers around the world. We just reached 300 chapters, and these chapter leaders are raising an army of truth tellers. So these people who are healed, like myself and like many others, are no longer willing to be silent. and allow our brothers and sisters to believe the same lie that we believed and suffered so much loss from. So that is why we started SaveOne, and that's what we're doing now. My name is Sheila Harper, and I'm a truth teller.